Something shifted in the last few weeks that most people haven't fully connected yet. Two separate announcements, one from Canada and one from the European Union, landed within days of each other, and when you put them side by side, the picture they form is remarkable. Both governments are spending billions of dollars to make sure they never have to ask an American company for permission to communicate, observe, or operate in space again. And the reason they're doing it traces back to a very specific moment during a very recent war. When the United States and Israel launched military strikes on Iran in late February, satellite data immediately became one of the most critical assets on the battlefield. High-resolution orbital imagery tells commanders what's been destroyed, where forces are moving, and what decisions to make in near real time. So when Planet Labs, one of America's leading commercial satellite imaging companies, announced it would extend the delay on releasing imagery of Iran and the broader Middle East from 4 days to 2 full weeks, every allied defense ministry took note. The reasoning was understandable. The data could be used in ways that put allied forces at risk. But the underlying message was impossible to ignore. If you depend on an American satellite company for battlefield intelligence, that company can slow your access, restrict your view, or shut you out entirely whenever its leadership or the U.S. government decides the situation warrants it. This wasn't even the first time the question had come up. Back in 2022, Ukrainian commanders requested that Starlink extend its coverage near Crimea so naval drones could stay connected during a strike operation targeting Russian warships. Elon Musk declined. The concern, as he later described it, was escalation risk. Whether you agree with his reasoning or not, the result was the same. A sovereign military operation was constrained because it depended on satellite coverage controlled by a private American citizen. That moment planted a seed in European and Canadian defense, thinking that has now bloomed into something genuinely significant. Canada's announcement came first. Defense Minister David McGuinty confirmed a 10-year, $200 million lease agreement with Maritime Launch Services for a spaceport on Canada's east coast, near the town of Canso in Nova Scotia. The facility will allow Canada to launch satellites and payloads from domestic soil using domestic rockets without routing through Florida or California or anywhere else that requires writing a check to SpaceX.
Canada needs its own space capability. But it's not only satellites that are critical to the defense and security of Canadians. It's access to space itself. It's why we're taking steps to strengthen our space capabilities so that we can launch from right here on Canadian soil. Simply put, every investment we make in space today and every technology that we develop is an investment in our economy, our people, our security, and our sovereignty. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that the Department of National Defense has signed a 10-year, $200 million agreement with Maritime Launch Services.
In European and Canadian defense, thinking that has now bloomed into something genuinely significant. Canada's announcement came first. Defense Minister David McGuinty confirmed a 10-year, $200 million lease agreement with Maritime Launch Services for a spaceport on Canada's east coast near the town of Canso in Nova Scotia. The facility will allow Canada to launch satellites and payloads from domestic soil using domestic rockets without routing through Florida or California or anywhere else that requires writing a check to SpaceX. McGuinty made the announcement at a Canadian Space Agency laboratory in Ottawa, and his framing was blunt. About 20% of Canada's entire economy depends on satellites, banking infrastructure, cellular networks, financial transactions. Canada wants sovereignty over that layer of its economy, and right now it doesn't have it. The irony sitting at the center of Canada's space story is almost hard to believe. Canada's largest satellite company, Telesat, is currently building a next-generation low-Earth orbit constellation specifically designed as a homegrown alternative to Starlink. Prime Minister Mark Carney highlighted it in a speech to Australia's Parliament. And yet, to get those satellites into orbit, Telesat currently relies on SpaceX rockets. The company building Canada's answer to Elon Musk's network depends on Elon Musk's launch infrastructure to make it work. That's the exact dependency the Nova Scotia spaceport is meant to close.
It's a test fire of an engine that one Canadian company hopes will bring rocket launches to Canada. eventually sending satellites into space from home soil, something that has never been done before. This unassuming building on the outskirts of Toronto is where the rocket is built and assembled. Even their engines are 3D printed in the building.
It's been about 2.5 years since we've been at this.
Rahul Goel is the founder and CEO of NordSpace. His company is set to launch its first rocket from Newfoundland by the end of the summer.
The federal budget had already allocated 183 million Canadian dollars for the Department of Defense to build out a sovereign launch capability. 3 domestic rocket startups, NordSpace, Canada Rocket Company, and Reaction Dynamics, won the first round of a government launch competition, and all 3 are Canadian firms. Canada also announced it's joining the NATO Starlink initiative, a shared launch network designed so that allied countries can get payloads into orbit quickly without depending on any one nation's infrastructure. And MDA Space, Canada's largest space technology company, closed a public equity offering worth approximately $300 million the same week. Everything is moving simultaneously. Zoom out a little further, and the scale becomes even more striking. In November of last year, Canada confirmed its largest investment in the European Space Agency since it first joined the partnership in 1979. 664 million Canadian dollars, a 400% increase over previous contributions. The money funds Earth observation, satellite communications, space exploration, and technology development. Every dollar Canada puts into ESA generates more than $3 in follow-on commercial contracts for Canadian companies, so the real return on that $600 million is closer to $2 billion in industry activity. The explicit goal, stated plainly in Parliament, is to reduce dependence on a single partner. That partner is the United States. Then, on June 11th, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne announced initial contracts to Canadian companies for the ground systems that will control Canada's next generation of sovereign Earth observation satellites. The contracts are the opening phase of a $1.012 billion 15-year program to build a fully Canadian-controlled satellite observation network. Construction, ground control, data processing, and eventually launch, all under Canadian sovereignty. For 3 decades, Canada's RadarSat satellites have monitored its coastlines, tracked Arctic shipping, and assisted disaster response. But those systems relied on foreign infrastructure at key points. The new program is designed to close every remaining gap. Add it all up: the spaceport lease, the Defense Launch Fund, the ESA investment, the observation program, the MDA offering, and Canada is committing well over $2 billion to space sovereignty across every critical layer, all at the same time. No comparable middle power is doing anything close to this across launch capability, satellite construction, ground infrastructure, and international partnerships simultaneously. Now turn to Europe, because what the European Commission announced is structurally even more aggressive. The EU published plans to divide the 2 GHz satellite frequency band, the spectrum that enables direct-to-device satellite communications, into 3 equal portions. The first third is reserved exclusively for EU government use, meaning security services, military communications, and critical government infrastructure. Under this block, service can only be provided by a European operator integrated with the EU's own IRIS² satellite constellation. Starlink is excluded. Amazon's Kuiper is excluded. Every non-European provider is excluded from the most sensitive tier of government satellite traffic, full stop. The second third is reserved for European commercial operators. The final third is open to non-EU companies, including SpaceX and Amazon, but only for general commercial services, never for government work. SpaceX responded publicly, calling the plan a threat to European satellite connectivity and warning that subdividing spectrum this way creates portions too narrow to be practically useful. The FCC chair in Washington raised the possibility of reciprocal restrictions on European satellite companies operating in American markets. The EU didn't blink. Defense and Space Commissioner Andrius Kubilius put it plainly: all 27 member states will now have access to sovereign satellite communications, military and government, secured and encrypted, built in Europe, operated under European control. He added that experts believe the resulting infrastructure will outperform Starlink. That is the stated ambition. The physical infrastructure behind that ambition is already being built. Govsat-com, a network linking 8 satellites from 5 member states for secure government communications, went live earlier this year and is already providing initial services across the entire EU. Ukraine has requested access and preparations are underway. IRIS², the broader constellation, will eventually consist of 290 satellites across multiple orbits. It's being built by a consortium led by SES of Luxembourg, Eutelsat of France, and Hispasat of Spain, under a 12-year concession signed in December. Initial services are targeted for 2029, full operations by 2030, with a total budget of 10.6 billion euros. Germany has pledged an additional 35 billion euros for broader space defense enhancement. France and Germany are jointly developing a satellite-based missile early warning system called Odin's Eye, expected to be operational in the early 2030s. The transition has a natural deadline built in. Current U.S. satellite licenses for the 2 GHz band, held by Viasat and EchoStar, expire in May 2027. That expiration gives the EU a clean window to implement the new framework without having to forcibly revoke existing agreements. The next time an American satellite company restricts access during a war, or a private operator refuses coverage during a military operation, Canada and the European Union will have their own systems in orbit, launched from their own territory, controlled entirely from their own ground stations. That's what all of this is building toward.